My name is Nora. I am 33 years old, and until that Christmas Eve, I was the designated punching bag of the Mitchell family. The setting for this disaster was my parents' sprawling mansion in Winnetka, Illinois. Patricia and Richard Mitchell loved nothing more than displaying their wealth, especially during the holidays. The dining room was suffocatingly warm, smelling of expensive roasted duck and my mother's cloying designer perfume. I sat at the far end of the impossibly long mahogany table, nursing a glass of tap water, while the rest of the extended family indulged in vintage champagne. As a lead user experience designer at a tech firm in Chicago, I worked 60 hours a week just to keep my head above water. In my family, that made me a failure. The real stars of the evening were sitting opposite me. My younger sister Ashley, 29 and a self-proclaimed social media influencer, was leaning against her husband Trey. Trey was 31, an African-American man who loved introducing himself as the founder of a revolutionary crypto hedge fund. He wore a bespoke suit that probably cost 3 times my monthly rent. "A toast, everyone," Patricia announced, tapping her manicured nails against a baccarat crystal flute. "To my brilliant son-in-law Trey and my beautiful daughter Ashley." As you all know, Trey has been working himself to the bone launching his new fund, and Ashley has been right by his side managing her massive following. They are just so exhausted. Ashley let out a dramatic practice sigh, resting her head on Trey's shoulder. Trey flashed a practiced smile, kissing the top of her head. "It has been a grind, Patricia. I will not lie," he said, his voice smooth and dripping with false humility. "But when you are building generational wealth, you have to put in the hours. Which is exactly why your father and I decided you two needed a break," Patricia beamed. She pulled a glossy gold embossed envelope from her blazer pocket and handed it down the table to Ashley. "Merry Christmas, you two. A VIP all-inclusive $17,000 Mediterranean cruise. 14 days of absolute luxury." The table erupted into applause. Ashley squealed, showing off the itinerary to the aunts and uncles sitting nearby. Trey raised his glass to my father Richard, who gave him a solemn, approving nod. "You guys deserve it," Richard boomed. "You are building an empire. You need to recharge." I stared at the rim of my water glass, keeping my face entirely neutral. Just 3 years prior, my parents had completely drained the college trust fund my grandparents had explicitly left for me. They claimed they needed liquidity for Richard's car showrooms. I later found out they had used every single cent of my college money to pay for Ashley and Trey's extravagant country club wedding. I had to take out massive predatory loans to finish my degree, a debt I was still aggressively paying off while they vacationed on yachts. Now Nora Richards' voice suddenly cut through the chatter, redirecting the room's attention to me. I looked up. My father reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small crumpled piece of paper. He flicked his wrist, tossing it carelessly down the length of the table. It fluttered in the air for a second before landing near my plate. It was a $20 Mega Millions quick pick ticket. "Merry Christmas to you too," Richard said, a patronizing smirk playing on his lips. "I know you have been struggling to make rent down there in the city. Figured this is your best shot at a promotion. Who knows, maybe you will win a few grand and finally trade in that embarrassing old Honda Civic of yours. It is an eyesore when you park it in my driveway." A few of the extended relatives chuckled nervously. Trey let out a low, mocking laugh, taking a sip of his champagne. "Hey, do not knock the lotto man," Trey said, looking at me with calculating eyes. "Some people are not built for the venture capital grind. They need a shortcut. Hope you hit the jackpot, Nora. Maybe you can finally afford to move out of that shoebox apartment." I looked down at the ticket. The numbers were randomly generated. I did not reach for it immediately. I just looked back up at my father. "A $20 lottery ticket," I said, my voice eerily calm, cutting through the residual laughter. "While you gift Ashley and Trey a $17,000 vacation, the same year you told me you could not afford to help me pay for my dental surgery." Patricia rolled her eyes, her face instantly hardening. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Nora, stop playing the victim. We are celebrating Trey's success tonight. Must you always make everything about your own failures?" "My failures?" I asked, pushing my chair back slightly. I work 60 hours a week. I support myself entirely. I have never asked you for a handout, Patricia. I only asked for the college fund that Grandma left in my name, the one you stole to pay for Ashley's wedding. Stole! Richard slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware rattle. I am your father. I put a roof over your head for 18 years. That money was family money, and we allocated it where it was needed most. Ashley was marrying a high-value man. They needed a proper start in life. A high-value man, I repeated, looking directly at Trey, who narrowed his eyes at me. Right. Well, I hope his invisible crypto funds keep keeping you all warm at night. I picked up the $20 lottery ticket, folding it neatly and sliding it into the pocket of my coat. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I just stood up. I am leaving, I said. Leaving. We have not even cut the cake yet. Patricia snapped, her voice rising in that familiar shrill octave that signaled a tantrum was brewing. You are not going to ruin this Christmas, Nora. Sit back down right now. No, I replied, grabbing my purse from the back of the chair. I think I have had enough family bonding for 1 year. You guys enjoy the cruise. And Trey, try not to scam anyone in international waters. Trey shot up from his chair, his tall frame looming over the table. Excuse me, you want to repeat that, you bitter jealous? Trey, honey, do not. Ashley interjected, grabbing his arm and immediately turning on the waterworks. Tears instantly welled in her wide doe eyes, a party trick she had mastered by the age of 6. Let her go. She is always like this. She just cannot stand to see us happy. I do not know why my own sister hates me so much. I do not hate you, Ashley, I said, zipping up my coat. I just do not care about you anymore. There is a difference. You are a disgrace, Richard shouted, his face purple with rage. You walk out that door and you do not bother coming back. You hear me? You are cut off. Cut off from what, Richard? I shot back, dropping the polite titles. The $20 lottery tickets, I think I will survive. I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room. I could hear my mother loudly apologizing to the aunts and uncles for my mental instability, while Trey muttered something about how I was going to die alone and broke. I did not look back. I marched through the grand foyer, out the heavy oak front doors, and stepped into the freezing Chicago winter air. The wind off Lake Michigan was brutal, cutting through my wool coat like invisible knives. I walked down the long, sweeping driveway of my parents' estate, spotting my 10-year-old Honda Civic parked near the service entrance, exactly where my mother had instructed me to park so her friends would not see it. I unlocked the car, slid into the freezing driver's seat, and gripped the steering wheel. For a moment, I just sat there in the dark, the engine off the cold seeping into my bones. My chest felt tight, the familiar crushing weight of being the family scapegoat pressing down on me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash my fists against the dashboard. But I did not. I just started the engine, turned up the heat, and drove back to the city. The drive to my apartment in the West Loop took about 45 minutes. My place was small, a modest one-bedroom that ate up a significant portion of my salary, but it was mine. It was quiet, safe, and entirely free of my parents' toxic influence. I threw my keys on the counter, kicked off my boots, and collapsed onto the sofa. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the crumpled Mega Millions ticket. 04-11-23-38-45. Megaball 09. I tossed it onto the coffee table. It was insulting. A literal scrap of paper thrown at me like a bone to a stray dog. I did not even care about the draw. The jackpot was making national headlines, something absurd nearing the $1 billion mark. Everyone in the office had been talking about it all week, pooling money to buy tickets. But I knew the odds. 1 in 300 million. You were more likely to get struck by lightning while getting eaten by a shark. I took a hot shower to wash the stench of my mother's perfume off my skin, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and went to bed. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb, not wanting to wake up to the inevitable barrage of angry gaslighting texts from my mother, demanding an apology for embarrassing them. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke up late. The apartment was quiet, the winter sun streaming through the blinds, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. I made myself a cup of strong black coffee and sat on the couch, pulling my laptop onto my lap. I had a few freelance projects I needed to finish up to make some extra cash for my student loan payments. As the laptop booted up, my eyes fell on the lottery ticket sitting on the coffee table. It was sitting right next to my phone. I tapped the phone screen to check the time. My heart skipped a beat. The screen was flooded with notifications. I did not just have one or two angry texts from my mother. I had an avalanche of them. 79 missed calls, 42 unread text messages. The calls were relentless. Patricia had called 20 times. Richard had called 30 times. Ashley and Trey had called the rest. I frowned, a sense of deep unease settling in my stomach. Even for my family's brand of toxic drama, this was extreme. Did someone die? Did Richard have a heart attack from his rage fit last night? I cautiously unlocked my phone and opened my text messages. I scrolled to the very first message my father had sent, time-stamped at 6 in the morning. Richard, Nora, pick up the phone now. This is an emergency. Patricia, Nora, sweetheart. Mommy is so worried about you. Please call us back. We love you so much. Ashley, OMG. Nora, pick up. We need to talk to you right now. Trey. Yo, Nora. It is Trey. We need to secure the asset. Call me ASAP. Do not talk to anyone else. Sweetheart, Mommy loves you. I stared at the screen, thoroughly repulsed. Patricia had not called me sweetheart since I was 7 years old. The sudden shift in tone from you, are a disgrace to frantic, desperate affection, sent alarm bells ringing in my head. What the hell is going on? I muttered to myself. I minimized the text messages and opened my browser. The homepage defaulted to a local Chicago news aggregate. The top headline practically screamed off the screen in bold black letters. Single winning Mega Millions ticket sold in Winnetka, Illinois. Jackpot hits $876 million. My blood turned to ice. I looked at the headline. Then I looked at the crumpled $20 ticket sitting on my coffee table. Slowly, with trembling fingers, I reached out and picked up the ticket. I opened a new tab and typed in the Illinois Lottery website. The winning numbers from last night's draw were displayed in bright yellow circles across the top of the page. 0, 411, 23, 38, 45. Megaball 09. I looked down at the ticket in my hand. 0, 411, 23, 38, 45. Megaball 09. I stopped breathing. The apartment was completely silent save for the hum of the refrigerator. I checked the numbers again, and again, and again. I read them backward. I read them forward. I checked the date on the ticket. I checked the date on the website. They matched. Every single number. I had not just won a few grand to buy a new car. I had won $876 million. And my father, who had purchased the quick pick ticket at his local Winnetka gas station and casually thrown it at me as an insult, must have memorized the numbers or kept the receipt. He knew. They all knew. My phone started vibrating wildly in my hand. Another incoming call. Patricia. I stared at the screen, watching the name flash. They did not want to apologize. They did not love me. They wanted the ticket. With a perfectly steady hand, I pressed the red button. Decline. My phone immediately started ringing again. This time it was Trey. I hit decline again. I went to my settings and blocked every single one of their numbers. Patricia, Richard, Ashley, Trey. Blocked. All of them. I did not pop champagne. I did not jump on the couch. I knew exactly what kind of people I was dealing with. I needed legal armor, and I needed it right now. I opened my laptop and searched for the most ruthless, high-net-worth wealth management firms in Chicago. I found a firm in the Loop that handled billionaire estates. I called their emergency holiday line. A junior associate answered, and I gave him the lottery ticket serial number to verify. 10 minutes later, the senior partner called me back. His name was Gavin. We arranged an emergency meeting for the very next morning. I drove to the glass and steel skyscraper in downtown Chicago. Gavin was a shark in a tailored suit, exactly what I needed. I handed him the $20 ticket. We spent the next 5 hours structuring a blind trust. In Illinois, lottery winners of massive jackpots can remain anonymous if they claim the prize through a legal trust. We named it the Horizon Trust. I signed the documents transferring ownership of the ticket to the trust, making Gavin the legal trustee. My name would never hit the public registry. My billions were securely locked behind layers of corporate privacy laws. I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders as I drove back to the West Loop. I was protected, or so I thought. When the elevator doors opened on my floor, I stopped dead in my tracks. Pacing furiously in the narrow hallway outside my apartment were four people I never wanted to see again: Patricia, Richard, Ashley, and Trey. The moment they saw me, the hostility from Christmas Eve vanished completely. It was replaced by a terrifying manic kind of affection. "Nora, sweetheart," Patricia screamed, rushing forward with her arms wide open. "We have been out of our minds with worry. Why is your phone off? We won. We actually won." Richard stepped up, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "I told you that ticket would change our lives, kiddo. I always knew buying it was the best investment I ever made for this family." I unlocked my door without saying a word. They pushed their way inside immediately, treating my tiny apartment like a waiting room for their new lives. Ashley threw herself onto my cheap sofa, scrolling frantically on her phone. "Look at this place in Beverly Hills." "Nora?" Ashley squealed, holding up her screen. "It has 9 bedrooms and a private screening room. We can totally fly out to tour it next week." Trey slammed a thick, leather-bound portfolio onto my kitchen counter. He leaned against the island, giving me that same arrogant smile, but now it was laced with hungry desperation. "Listen up, Nora," Trey said, his deep voice shifting into full-pitch mode. "You are going to be hit with an insane tax burden. You need to shelter that capital immediately. I drew up a 50-page proposal this morning. We need to wire $50 million into my crypto hedge fund by Monday. I can route it through offshore accounts to maximize our tax loopholes. It is a win for the whole family." "Do not forget your father and me," Patricia chimed in, examining her manicured nails. "We were thinking $100 million is a fair starting point. Consider it back pay for raising you, putting a roof over your head, and paying for your early education. It is the least you can do to honor your parents." I looked at the 50-page business plan. I looked at Ashley browsing mansions. I looked at Patricia demanding $100 million for doing the bare minimum required by law for a child. I let out a sharp laugh. It was a cold, harsh sound that silenced the entire room. "What is so funny?" Richard demanded, his fake smile slipping. "You are all completely delusional," I said, crossing my arms. "You handed me that ticket to humiliate me. You literally threw it at me and told me it was my only shot at success. Well, you were right. It was a gift. It belongs to me. And you are getting absolutely nothing. Not 50 million, not 100 million, not a single cent." The atmosphere in the apartment instantly turned toxic. The fake smiles vanished. "You ungrateful little brat," Richard roared, his face turning violently red. "I bought that ticket. I paid for it. That makes it community family property. You are just the vessel holding it." Trey stepped forward, towering over me, his fists clenched at his sides. "You do not want to play this game, Nora. You do not know how to manage this kind of wealth. You are going to sign over the funds, or we are going to make your life a living hell." "Get out of my house," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Get out right now, or I am calling the police and having you all arrested for trespassing." Ashley burst into furious tears, calling me a selfish monster. Patricia screamed that I was dead to her. Trey refused to move, planting his feet on my kitchen floor and glaring down at me. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The moment the operator answered, they finally backed toward the door. "This is not over," Richard spat, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "I will sue you for every penny. I will drag you through the mud. You are nothing without this family." I slammed the door in their faces and threw the deadbolt. My hands were shaking, but my resolve was absolute. 2 days later, the real war began. I was sitting at my desk in the tech office reviewing wireframes for a client app. The receptionist walked over looking terrified, followed by a man in a cheap suit. He slammed a thick stack of legal documents onto my desk. "You have been served," he said before turning and walking away. I stared at the paperwork. It was an emergency injunction filed in the probate court. Richard and Patricia were suing me. The lawsuit claimed the lottery ticket was purchased as part of an oral family syndicate agreement, and they were seeking to immediately freeze the payout. They had hired a sleazy, aggressive local attorney known for filing frivolous lawsuits to extort settlements. My desk phone rang. It was Gavin, my wealth manager. His voice was grim. "Nora, we have a major problem," Gavin said. "The injunction is a nuisance, but that is not the worst of it. Your family just leaked your name to the tabloids. They are painting you as a thief. Brace yourself because the media is about to descend on you." The next morning, I walked into Gavin's office and dropped a printed copy of Dexter's dossier onto his polished mahogany desk. Gavin scanned the documents, his eyebrows raising higher with every page. When he reached the details of Trey's Ponzi scheme, a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He looked at me and asked how I wanted to proceed. I told him I did not want to fight their ridiculous syndicate claim defensively. I wanted to go on the offensive. Gavin pointed out a fatal flaw in the lawsuit Richard's sleazy attorney had filed. To prove he purchased the ticket for the family, Richard had willingly submitted 3 months of his personal bank statements to the probate court. In the legal world, opening that door meant Gavin could kick it off its hinges. By noon, Gavin filed a motion to subpoena the entirety of my family's financial records for the past 3 years. The justification was simple. If my parents claimed the lottery ticket was funded by a family syndicate, we needed to verify the syndicate's operational funding and financial health. The trap snapped shut immediately. The sleazy attorney realized his catastrophic mistake within hours. He filed a desperate emergency motion to withdraw the bank statements and seal the records, terrified of exposing the massive fraud. The judge denied the withdrawal. The financial records were officially subpoenaed. My family was backed into a legal corner they had built themselves. The subpoena forced Richard and Trey to legally disclose their debts to the court. The moment those records hit the public docket, the facade shattered. It took less than a day for the gossip to spread through the wealthy enclaves of Winnetka. The society pages and local business blogs picked up the story of the bankrupt car dealership owner and the crypto fraudster son-in-law. The country club canceled their membership. The people who had attended Ashley's extravagant wedding realized it was paid for with stolen money and predatory loans. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Patricia. Her voice was unrecognizable, stripped of all its haughty arrogance, reduced to hysterical sobbing. She screamed that I had destroyed their reputation, that her friends were ignoring her calls, and that the bank was officially putting our family mansion up for auction the following Friday. She begged me to release the lottery funds, crying that Trey was going to be arrested if they did not pay back the investors. I listened to the entire voicemail with a cup of coffee in my hand. I did not feel a shred of pity. I deleted the message and called Gavin with my next set of instructions. I authorized Gavin to utilize a fraction of my lottery winnings through the Horizon Trust. We approached the primary bank holding the mortgage on the Winnetka mansion, as well as the secondary debt collectors who owned the predatory loans Richard and Trey had desperately taken out. Because the debt was highly distressed and at high risk of default, the banks were thrilled to offload it. Through my anonymous holding company, I legally purchased their entire debt portfolio. I bought the mortgage. I bought the liens on Richard's remaining inventory. I bought the high-interest loans funding Trey's fake crypto lifestyle. I became their sole creditor. Gavin sent a formal legal notice to their attorney. The notice stated that their debt had been acquired by a new corporate entity and required an immediate mandatory mediation session to discuss total asset seizure and foreclosure. The mediation was set for Tuesday morning at Gavin's high-rise law firm in downtown Chicago. I arrived early and waited in a private adjacent room, watching through a tinted glass wall as my family strutted into the main conference room. Even facing total ruin, their arrogance was staggering. They believed this mediation was a negotiation with an anonymous banking representative. They thought they could leverage the pending lottery lawsuit to buy themselves more time. Trey wore a custom suit, sweating profusely, but trying to play the big shot. He loudly instructed their sleazy lawyer not to accept anything less than $100 million from the lottery settlement to cover their debts. Patricia was clutching her designer handbag like a shield, while Ashley touched up her makeup, completely oblivious to the reality that her influencer career was dead and her husband was a criminal. Richard paced the room, demanding the mediator hurry up so he could save his house. They genuinely thought they still had leverage. They thought my money was their guaranteed bailout. I pushed open the heavy glass door and walked into the conference room. I wore a sharp, tailored suit and carried a thick leather binder containing every single debt note they owed. Richard scoffed the moment he saw me. He demanded to know why I was crashing a private debt mediation, yelling that I needed to sit down and wait my turn to sign over the lottery ticket. I did not say a word. I walked straight to the head of the long glass table and took the mediator's seat. I dropped the heavy leather binder onto the table. The loud thud echoed in the silent room. I looked directly at my father. I told him I was not here to settle the frivolous lottery lawsuit. I told him I was here because the Horizon Trust had purchased his debt. I opened the binder and slid the mortgage documents across the glass. I own the mortgage to the Winnetka house, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I own the liens on your cars. I own the debt from your failed dealerships. I am your sole creditor. The color completely drained from Richard's face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Patricia dropped her designer handbag onto the floor, her hands trembling violently. Ashley stared at the documents in utter disbelief, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the sheer terror spreading across her features. Trey took a step back, his confident facade shattering instantly. He looked at the paperwork, then at me, his eyes wide with the realization that he was completely trapped. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the glass table. "You tried to destroy my life over a $20 piece of paper," I said softly. "You tried to ruin my reputation and steal my future to cover up your own crimes. But you forgot one crucial detail. I actually work for a living. I know how to manage assets, and now I manage yours." Chaos erupted in the room. Ashley turned on Trey, screaming at the top of her lungs, hitting his chest with her fists as she realized he had gambled away everything they had. Patricia clutched her chest, gasping for air, hyperventilating, as the reality of her lost social status crushed her. Richard lunged toward the table, screaming that this was illegal, that I could not do this to my own family. My private security team stepped into the room, immediately subduing Richard and forcing him back into his chair. I watched them fall apart without an ounce of sympathy. They had built a life on lies, manipulation, and greed, and now the bill was finally due. I closed the leather binder and stood up, looking down at the people who had tormented me for my entire life. "You have 48 hours to vacate my property," I told them, "or I will have the sheriff remove you by force." "And Trey," I added, turning to my brother-in-law, whose face was slick with terrified sweat. "I did not buy your crypto debt. I sent your financial ledger directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission." Right on cue, the heavy oak doors of the law firm lobby swung open. Sirens wailed down on the Chicago streets below. Two federal agents walked into the conference room, flashing their badges. They bypassed Richard and walked straight toward Trey, pulling his arms behind his back and snapping cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. Ashley collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, as her husband was dragged away for wire fraud. I walked out of the conference room, leaving them to the destruction they had orchestrated for themselves. 6 months later, the Winnetka mansion was sold, and Richard and Patricia were living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment, completely shunned by the society they had worshipped. I stood on the balcony of my new penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, holding a glass of vintage wine. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. I knew it was Patricia begging for a handout. I smiled, tapped block, and tossed the phone onto the sofa, finally free to live the life I had built. The heavy steel doors of the elevator slid open on the 4th floor of my apartment building. I had just spent the last 5 hours sitting in a high-rise boardroom with Gavin constructing the impenetrable legal fortress of the Horizon Trust. I was completely exhausted, running on nothing but adrenaline and bitter black coffee, but I finally felt a sense of profound safety. That fragile illusion of safety shattered the very second I stepped out of the elevator car and looked down the narrow, dimly lit corridor. Pacing furiously outside my unit were the four people I had explicitly blocked from my digital life just hours ago: Richard, Patricia, Ashley, and Trey. They took up the entire width of the hallway, a suffocating wall of expensive wool coats and toxic entitlement. The moment their eyes locked onto me, the sheer hostility they had radiated on Christmas Eve vanished entirely. It was replaced instantly by a terrifying, manic brand of affection that made my stomach turn. "Nora, sweetheart!" Patricia screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the cheap hallway wallpaper. She rushed forward with her arms thrown wide open, her heavy Chanel perfume hitting me like a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around my shoulders in a crushing hug, a gesture she had not initiated since I was in elementary school. "We have been completely out of our minds with worry. Why is your phone turned off?" "God has finally blessed our family, Nora. Our prayers have been answered." I stood rigidly, keeping my arms pinned to my sides. I did not return the hug. I simply stared over her shoulder at my father. Richard stepped right up his chest, puffed out with unearned pride. He clapped a heavy, overly familiar hand onto my shoulder and squeezed hard. "I told you that ticket would change our trajectory, kiddo," he boomed, a wide, predatory smile plastered across his face. "I always knew buying that ticket was the best investment I ever made for this family. I had a gut feeling about those numbers. I saved us, Nora. We are going to be on top of the world again." The psychological whiplash was staggering. Less than 24 hours ago, he had thrown that exact same ticket at my plate to mock my poverty and humiliate me in front of our extended relatives. Now he was desperately rewriting history, trying to frame his cruel insult as a stroke of paternal genius and a shared family victory. I did not say a word. I pulled my keys from my purse, stepped around my mother, and slid the key into the deadbolt of my front door. The second the lock clicked open, they did not wait for an invitation. Trey immediately used his large frame to block the door from closing, pushing his way inside. Patricia and Ashley swarmed in right behind him, treating my modest one-bedroom apartment like a temporary waiting room for their new billionaire lifestyles. The physical intrusion was overwhelming. My apartment was small, a practical space meant for one person. Suddenly, it was overflowing with their loud voices and their suffocating greed. They completely ignored my boundaries, breezing past me and taking over the living room as if the money was already sitting in their bank accounts. Ashley threw herself onto my inexpensive sofa, not even bothering to take off her designer boots. She was already scrolling frantically on her smartphone, her thumbs flying across the screen. "Oh my God, Nora, you can finally move out of this depressing dump!" Ashley squealed, holding her phone high in the air to show off the bright screen. "I am already looking at properties. Look at this compound in Beverly Hills. It has 9 bedrooms, a private screening room, an infinity pool, and a fully detached guest house for Trey and me. We can easily fly out to California to tour it next week. I can film all my brand deals by the pool. It is perfectly aesthetic for my channel." She was using the word "we." She had already moved herself and her husband into a hypothetical $20 million mansion using my money, entirely dismissing the fact that she had stood in our parents' foyer just last night and watched me get disowned without lifting a single finger to defend me. Patricia began wandering around my small kitchen, picking up my coffee mugs and inspecting them with a look of mild disgust. "We will need to hire a top-tier financial team immediately," she announced to the room, completely ignoring the fact that I was standing silently by the front door. "We have to protect the family assets from the government. The taxes on $800 million will be absolutely criminal. Richard, you need to call your guys at the country club and get a referral for a wealth manager who handles 9-figure portfolios." "That will not be necessary, Patricia," a deep, smooth voice interrupted. Trey stepped forward, moving away from the window and walking directly into the center of my kitchen. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, projecting the aura of a high-powered corporate savior arriving to rescue the ignorant masses. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, professionally bound document. He slapped it down onto my kitchen island. The heavy thud of the paper hitting the granite countertop echoed sharply in the small room. He leaned against the island, crossing his arms, and giving me that same arrogant, condescending smile he always wore, but now it was laced with a hungry, desperate intensity that he could not quite hide. "Listen up, Nora Trey," said, his tone shifting into a forceful, authoritative business pitch. "You are about to be hit with a historic tax burden. If you claim this money as an individual, the federal government is going to slaughter you. You need to shelter that capital immediately, and you need a professional to do it. I drew up this 50-page business and routing proposal this morning." He tapped his manicured finger aggressively against the cover of the bound document. "We need to wire $50 million into my crypto hedge fund by Monday morning." Trey demanded, his eyes locking onto mine with absolute entitlement. "I have the infrastructure already in place. I can route the capital through a series of offshore accounts in the Caymans to completely maximize our tax loopholes. It shields the money from the IRS. It provides immediate liquidity for the family to start purchasing real estate, and it scales my fund to the next level. It is a win for the whole family, Nora. But the transfer has to happen by Monday, or we lose the optimal window for the quarter." I stared at the thick leather-bound proposal sitting on my cheap laminate countertop. $50 million by Monday. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I looked at Trey, who was standing there with his chest puffed out, fully expecting me to be overwhelmed by his financial jargon. Then I looked at Ashley, who had paused her Zillow scrolling to stare at me with greedy, expectant eyes. I let out a laugh. It started as a soft chuckle in the back of my throat, but it quickly grew into a full, harsh laugh that bounced off the walls of my small apartment. It was not a happy sound. It was the sound of a decade of suppression finally shattering. Trey frowned, his confident posture stiffening. "I fail to see what is humorous about tax optimization, Nora. This is a highly time-sensitive financial strategy." I ignored him and turned my attention to my mother. "And what about you, Patricia?" I asked, crossing my arms over my chest. "Trey has his $50 million invoice all typed out and ready to go. What is your cut supposed to be in this grand family victory? How much is my existence worth to you today?" Patricia stood up, smoothing the front of her designer coat, her expression shifting into one of profound entitlement. "Do not use that tone with me, Nora. Your father and I were discussing it in the car, and we decided that $100 million is a fair starting point. Consider it back pay. We raised you. We put a roof over your head, we fed you, and we paid for your early education. We sacrificed our best years to give you a foundation. It is the absolute least you can do to honor your parents and ensure our retirement is secure. $100 million for doing the bare legal minimum required of a parent." They had the nerve to call it a sacrifice, conveniently forgetting the massive predatory loans I had to take out because they drained my college trust fund for Ashley's country club wedding. They honestly believed they were entitled to a massive payout just for allowing me to exist in their house. I walked around the kitchen island, placing myself firmly between them and my front door. "Let me make this crystal clear so there is zero room for misunderstanding," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. "You handed me that ticket to humiliate me. You literally threw it at my plate in front of our entire extended family and told me it was my only shot at success. You called me an embarrassment because I actually work for a living." "We were just joking," Ashley whined, chiming in from the couch. "You are always so sensitive about everything." "Well, the joke paid off," I replied, staring directly into my father's eyes. "You gave it to me as a gift. A cruel, insulting gift, but a gift nonetheless. That makes it mine. Legally, entirely, and exclusively mine." I took a slow breath, letting the reality of my next words sink into their greedy minds. "You are getting absolutely nothing. Not a single cent. Trey, your fake crypto fund is not getting $50 million. Patricia, you are not getting $100 million for basic parenting. And Ashley, you can close Zillow right now because I am not buying you a mansion in Beverly Hills. You are all getting exactly what you gave me when I was struggling. Nothing." The atmosphere in the apartment instantly turned toxic. The fake manic smiles vanished, replaced by the ugly, vicious faces I had grown up with. The mask of a loving family dissolved in a fraction of a second. Get out of my apartment, I said, pointing toward the door. Now. Richard's face turned a violent mottled shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his expensive collar. You ungrateful, selfish little brat! He roared, his voice shaking the windows of my living room. He lunged forward, slamming his fist onto the kitchen island so hard my coffee mugs rattled. I bought that ticket. I paid for it with my hard-earned money. That makes it community family property. You are just the vessel holding it for the family syndicate. There is no family syndicate, I fired back, refusing to flinch or step away. There is just a man who threw a $20 bill at his daughter to make himself feel big. Trey stepped forward, using his height and broad shoulders to tower over me. He positioned himself intentionally close, invading my personal space in a classic intimidation tactic. His hands balled into fists at his sides. You do not want to play this game with us, Nora Trey said, his voice dropping into a menacing growl. You have no idea how to manage this kind of capital. You are going to sign over the funds, or we are going to make your life a living hell. Get out, I repeated, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Make us! Trey challenged, planting his feet firmly on my hardwood floor. He crossed his arms, staring down at me with absolute contempt. We are not leaving this apartment until we have a signed agreement. I did not argue. I did not scream. I calmly reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone and dialed 911. I held the screen up so Trey and Richard could see the numbers, dialed, my thumb hovering directly over the green call button. I will give you exactly 3 seconds to step out of my home, I said, locking eyes with Trey. If you are not in the hallway by the time I count to 3, I am telling the police dispatcher that 2 men have broken into my apartment and are physically threatening me. 1. Patricia gasped, grabbing Richard's arm. Richard, let us go. She has completely lost her mind. 2. I pressed my thumb slightly closer to the glass screen. Trey's arrogant smirk finally cracked. He realized I was not bluffing. He snatched his 50-page business proposal off the counter, nearly knocking over a vase in his haste. Ashley scrambled off the couch, her face pale, muttering under her breath about how I was a psycho. Richard let Patricia pull him toward the door, but he turned back one last time, pointing a trembling, furious finger directly at my face. This is not over. Richard spat, his voice laced with venom. I will sue you for every penny. I will freeze those assets before you can even touch them. I will drag you through the mud until you have nothing left. You are nothing without this family. Goodbye, Richard, I said. I slammed the heavy door in their faces and immediately threw the deadbolt, listening to the satisfying click of the lock sliding into place. I stood with my back pressed against the heavy steel door, listening to their muffled, angry footsteps retreating down the hallway. The silence that followed was absolute. I slid down to the floor, resting my head against the cool wood. I had won the first battle, but I knew my father. Richard did not lose gracefully. He was a man who believed the world owed him everything he demanded, and he would burn my life to the ground before he let me walk away with a single dollar. I spent the rest of the weekend in complete isolation, preparing myself for the inevitable fallout. On Tuesday morning, I decided to go into the office. I needed the routine. I needed the familiar hum of the tech startup where I worked as a lead user experience designer. Sitting at my dual-monitor desk, analyzing wireframes and user flows gave me a sense of control that my personal life currently lacked. The Horizon Trust was officially established, but the actual payout transfer from the State Lottery Commission would take a few more days to process. Until then, I was technically still just an average employee living paycheck to paycheck on paper. At exactly 11 in the morning, my focus was broken. The glass door of the open plan office swung open. Our receptionist walked nervously toward my desk, followed closely by a man in a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit. He did not look like a tech vendor or a client. He walked with a heavy, deliberate stride. He stopped right in front of my desk, pulling a thick manila envelope from his briefcase. Are you Nora Mitchell? He asked loudly enough for several of my coworkers to look up from their screens. I am, I replied cautiously, standing up. He shoved the thick envelope directly into my chest, forcing me to grab it before it fell. "You have been served," he announced. He immediately turned on his heel and walked out of the office, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. My heart hammered against my ribs. I grabbed my laptop bag, clutched the envelope, and practically ran into the nearest empty glass-walled conference room. I pulled the blinds shut to block the curious stares of my colleagues. My hands trembled slightly as I ripped open the manila envelope and pulled out a massive stack of legal documents. The bold black letters at the top of the first page made my blood run cold. It was an emergency injunction filed in the probate court of Cook County. The plaintiffs listed were Richard and Patricia Mitchell. I quickly scanned the legal jargon, searching for their angle. They were not just suing me for a share of the money. They were seeking to completely freeze the $876 million payout before it could be transferred to my blind trust. Their legal justification was a completely fabricated concept they called an oral family syndicate agreement. According to the sworn affidavit attached to the filing, Richard claimed that our family had a long-standing verbal agreement that any lottery tickets purchased during holiday gatherings were community property meant to be shared equally among all family members. He stated under penalty of perjury that he purchased the ticket using pooled family funds and that I was merely the designated vessel instructed to hold the ticket for the syndicate. It was a breathtaking, verifiable lie. He had thrown that ticket at me as a targeted insult meant to mock my financial struggles. There was no syndicate. There were no pooled funds. But in the eyes of a probate judge, an emergency affidavit claiming community property was enough to temporarily halt a massive financial transfer. I flipped to the last page to see who was representing them. The signature belonged to Leonard Briggs. My stomach churned. Even outside the legal profession, everyone in Chicago knew who Leonard Briggs was. His face was plastered across dozens of highway billboards. He was a sleazy, aggressive personal injury and probate lawyer notorious for filing frivolous, high-profile lawsuits designed entirely to extort massive settlements. Briggs did not care about the truth. He cared about making cases so incredibly messy and public that the defendant would eventually pay him to go away. I pulled out my phone and dialed Gavin, my wealth management attorney. He answered on the second ring. "I just got served at my office," I told him, pacing the length of the small conference room. "Richard and Patricia filed an emergency injunction. They are claiming an oral family syndicate agreement to freeze the payout. They hired Leonard Briggs." I heard Gavin let out a sharp, humorless sigh on the other end of the line. I expected a shakedown, but going straight to an emergency injunction with a bottom feeder like Briggs means they are highly motivated. They want to starve you out legally. They know that a typical UX designer cannot afford to fight a multi-year probate battle against a billionaire estate. They are banking on you running out of money for legal fees and settling out of court. "They do not know about the Horizon Trust," I reminded him. "They do not know I already have you on retainer." "Exactly," Gavin replied, his tone shifting into a sharp, tactical focus. "The syndicate claim is entirely fraudulent, but Briggs knows how to manipulate the probate docket. He will demand discovery. He will demand sworn depositions. He will try to drag this out until the State Lottery Commission refuses to disburse the funds pending a court order. We need to file a motion to quash the injunction immediately. I am pulling my top litigation team into a war room right now." I felt a surge of cold fury. My parents were perfectly willing to commit perjury to steal what was mine. They were willing to drag me into a brutal legal battle just to fund Ashley's fake influencer lifestyle and Trey's fraudulent crypto empire. "How quickly can we destroy this claim?" I asked, stopping by the window to look down at the busy Chicago street below. "I want to crush them, Gavin. I do not want to settle. I want this thrown out with prejudice." "We have a very strong defensive position," Gavin assured me. "Since the ticket was a quick pick, there is no consistent number history they can claim as a family tradition. Furthermore, their hostile behavior on Christmas Eve directly contradicts the idea of a collaborative family syndicate. But Nora, you need to understand something about lawyers like Leonard Briggs. They do not fight in the courtroom. They fight in the gutter." "What does that mean?" I asked, gripping the phone tighter. Gavin went completely silent on the line. I could hear the rapid clicking of his keyboard in the background. The silence stretched on for 5 agonizing seconds. "Gavin," I prompted, feeling a sudden spike of anxiety. What is going on? Nora. Gavin finally said, his voice dropping an octave. The lawsuit was not just a legal maneuver, it was a public relations strategy. I do not understand, I said. Briggs just bypassed the court seal, Gavin explained, his tone grim and urgent. I am looking at a breaking news alert from the Chicago Tribune. Your family did not just sue you privately. They went directly to the press. They just leaked your full name, your occupation, and your photograph to the tabloids. The whole world now knows you are the winner. Brace yourself, Nora. The media is about to descend on you. I hung up the phone and walked straight to the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of my office. I looked down at the busy Chicago street below. Gavin was absolutely right. A white news van was already pulling up to the curb, illegally parking in a loading zone. Two men with heavy camera equipment jumped out of the back doors, while a reporter in a sharp trench coat adjusted her microphone. My stomach dropped, but I did not panic. I had spent my entire life navigating the chaotic emotional minefields my family created. I knew how to survive a crisis. I grabbed my laptop, shoved it into my leather tote bag, and threw on my winter coat. I bypassed the main reception area where the front desk phone was already beginning to ring incessantly. Instead, I took the emergency exit staircase down to the ground floor and slipped out through the building's rear loading dock. The frigid winter air hit my face as I power walked down the concrete alleyway, pulling my hood up to shield my identity. I ordered a premium black car service and ducked into the back seat the moment it pulled up to the curb. As the driver merged into the downtown traffic, my phone started exploding with news alerts. The sleazy attorney my parents hired, Leonard Briggs, had not just released a simple press statement. He had organized a full-blown press conference right on the steps of the Cook County Courthouse. I opened the top trending article on a local tabloid site. The headline was designed to incite maximum public outrage. Ungrateful tech worker steals elderly parent's lottery ticket. I tapped the video clip attached to the article. There was my father, Richard, wearing a slightly wrinkled suit designed to make him look like a weary, hard-working everyman rather than a bankrupt luxury car dealer. He looked somber and utterly betrayed. Next to him, Patricia dabbed her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the heartbroken matriarch to absolute perfection. Leonard Briggs stood at a podium speaking directly to the cameras with practiced theatrical outrage. He claimed that my parents had pooled their modest retirement savings to buy lottery tickets as part of a long-standing holiday family syndicate. He told the reporters that I had taken advantage of their trust, snatched the winning ticket during a Christmas dinner argument, and vanished into the city to claim their life savings for myself. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. They were executing a masterclass in manipulation, trying me in the court of public opinion before we even reached a judge. My phone vibrated in my hand. It was Gavin. "Do not go back to your apartment in the West Loop," Gavin ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. "I have security monitoring your building. There are already 4 paparazzi camped out by your front door and a news crew setting up across the street. You cannot go home, Nora. They will swarm you the second you step out of a vehicle." "I am in a car right now," I told him, keeping my voice steady. "Where do I go?" "I anticipated this," Gavin replied. "I secured a luxury hotel penthouse under a corporate alias. It is an ultra-private residence in a 5-star hotel downtown. It has a secure underground parking garage and a private elevator. The media cannot get past the lobby security. I am texting you the address and the entry protocols right now. Go straight there and lock the doors." As the car rerouted toward the luxury hotel, I received a frantic text message from my boss, Greg. "Nora, the company switchboard is completely jammed. Reporters are calling every single extension demanding a statement about your employment. They are harassing our junior designers on LinkedIn." What is going on? Guilt twisted in my chest. My colleagues at the UX firm were good people who simply wanted to design apps and write code. They did not deserve to be collateral damage in my family's toxic greed. I opened my email app and quickly typed out a formal resignation letter to Greg. I apologized for the sudden disruption and officially terminated my employment, effective immediately. I had enough money locked in the Horizon Trust to buy the entire tech company 10 times over. I did not need the job anymore, and I absolutely refused to subject my innocent coworkers to this media circus. My driver pulled into the secured underground garage of the five-star hotel. A massive steel gate closed behind us, shutting out the chaotic city streets. A hotel security director in a tailored suit was waiting for me at the private elevator bank. He escorted me up in total silence, swiping a secure keycard that granted us access to the top floor. Once inside the sprawling penthouse, I locked the heavy mahogany doors and walked over to the massive windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. The suite was breathtakingly opulent, featuring imported marble floors, a private dining room, and a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. I was entirely safe, physically isolated from the reporters hunting me down on the streets below. But the digital assault was just beginning. The public backlash was instantaneous and vicious. My name was trending on every major social media platform. Thousands of strangers who knew absolutely nothing about me or the decades of psychological abuse I had endured were labeling me a monster. They called me a thief, a sociopath, and a greedy corporate tech worker who was content to let her elderly parents starve. The narrative Leonard Briggs had spun was working perfectly. I stood in the center of the silent, luxurious penthouse, staring down at my phone. I was ready to call Gavin and instruct him to release a counterstatement when a new notification flashed across the top of my screen. It was an alert from Instagram. Ashley had just gone live. My blood ran cold. I tapped the notification and the screen immediately filled with my sister's face. She was sitting in her lavishly decorated living room, wearing an oversized sweater and zero makeup, a deliberate choice to make herself look fragile and distressed. Over 50,000 people were already watching the broadcast, and the viewer count was climbing by the second. Tears streamed down Ashley's face as she stared into the camera, her lower lip trembling flawlessly. She took a ragged, shaky breath before she started to speak. "I never thought I would have to do this," Ashley sobbed, her voice cracking with manufactured grief. "I never thought my own flesh and blood could be so evil. But my sister Nora did not just steal that lottery ticket from my poor parents. She has a history of destroying this family. She has a history of stealing from us. I am begging everyone watching this, please help us get justice. Please help us stop her before she ruins our lives forever." I watched the viewer count on Ashley's live stream climb past 70,000. She sat there wiping away non-existent tears, weaving a spectacular web of lies. She told her audience that I had always been the black sheep, deeply jealous of her success and her happy marriage to Trey. The most enraging moment came when she looked directly into the camera and claimed that I had stolen her college savings years ago, and now I was back to steal our elderly parents' retirement fund. It was textbook psychological projection. She was accusing me of the exact financial abuse my parents had committed against me to fund her wedding. The comment section scrolled past so fast it was a blur of text, but the sentiment was clear. Ashley's followers were a mobilized army, and they had a target. My phone began vibrating continuously on the marble countertop. My personal Instagram and Twitter accounts, which I used mostly to post design portfolios and architecture photos, were being bombarded. I opened my notifications and watched the vitriol pour in. Thousands of direct messages clogged my inbox. People were calling me a parasite. They told me I deserved to be locked in a cage. Several messages crossed the line into violent criminal territory, detailing exactly how they wanted to hurt me if they ever saw me on the streets of Chicago. Someone posted the address of my old West Loop apartment, urging followers to go wait for me there. They were actively attempting to dox me, trying to hunt me down for a woman they only knew through filtered photographs and sponsored posts. A normal person might have cracked under the weight of that digital mob. I could have set up my own camera, hit record, and cried my eyes out to explain the truth. I could have posted the bank statements proving my parents stole my college fund. But I refused to play their game. I was not going to participate in a public screaming match with a professional narcissist. I was a UX designer. I analyzed user behavior, identified systemic flaws, and implemented permanent structural solutions. I took calm, methodical screenshots of Ashley's live stream, capturing her exact defamatory statements. I documented the death threats, the doxing attempts, and the coordinated harassment campaign. I compiled everything into a clean, organized digital folder and forwarded it directly to Gavin's secure email address. Then I called him. He picked up immediately, sounding like he was already in the middle of a war room. "I assume you are watching the broadcast," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I am watching it with 3 of the top defamation litigators in Illinois," Gavin replied, the sound of rapid typing echoing through the line. "They are practically salivating, Nora. Your sister just committed textbook slander and libel on a recorded public platform to an audience of nearly 100,000 people. She is claiming you committed grand larceny without a shred of proof. We can sue her into oblivion for this." "I do not just want to sue her," I told him, gripping the edge of the glass dining table. "A lawsuit takes months. She is destroying my reputation right now. I want to hit her where she feels it today. Hit her wallet." Gavin chuckled, a dark, sharp sound. "Tell me what you want." "I want a cease and desist issued immediately," I instructed. "But do not just serve it to Ashley. I want you to copy the legal departments of every single corporate sponsor listed on her link tree. Send the notice to the makeup companies, the fast fashion brands, and the fitness supplement startups she promotes. Inform them that their sponsored creator is actively engaging in a malicious defamation campaign that incites violence. Make sure those brands understand that if they continue to fund her platform, we will view them as complicit and pursue massive damages for tortious interference." "Consider it done," Gavin said. "We will drop a legal bomb on her entire brand network within the hour." I hung up the phone and walked into the kitchen to pour myself a glass of sparkling water. I did not check my social media again. I simply stood by the panoramic window and watched the winter sun begin to set over Lake Michigan, waiting for the fallout. It took exactly 47 minutes. I was checking my email when the first breaking news alert popped up on my screen from a digital marketing trade blog. Ashley's biggest sponsor, a multinational cosmetics brand that had just signed her to a massive multi-year contract, released a swift and brutal public statement. The brand announced they were severing all ties with Ashley Mitchell, effective immediately, citing a strict zero-tolerance policy for online harassment and defamatory behavior. The financial blow was catastrophic. That single contract was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was the absolute cornerstone of Ashley's influencer empire. And because the cosmetics giant had publicly dropped her, the blood in the water attracted the other sharks. Within the next 30 minutes, 3 more of her sponsors quietly pulled their campaigns, deleting her promotional codes from their websites to avoid the incoming legal crossfire from my billionaire trust fund. My phone lit up. Ashley was calling. Then Patricia. Then Ashley again. I watched their names flash across the screen, knowing exactly what was happening in their household. Ashley was likely having a total meltdown, screaming at the top of her lungs as her career vanished before her eyes. The fake tears had just cost her the only legitimate income she had. But backing greedy, desperate people into a corner only makes them more dangerous. Trey had been banking on Ashley's brand deals to maintain the illusion of their wealth while his fake crypto fund bled money. With her income suddenly gone and my lottery funds locked behind a wall of high-priced lawyers, Trey realized he was running out of time and options. My phone screen went dark as Ashley's call timed out, but it instantly lit up again with a new text message. It was from an unknown number, an untraceable burner phone. The message contained 2 attachments. The first was a photograph of the loading dock at my former tech office taken from across the street. The second was a photograph of the private underground entrance to the luxury hotel where I was currently hiding. A line of text followed the photos. "You think you can hide behind your lawyers? You think cutting off our money makes you untouchable? We know where you are. I am coming to get what belongs to my family, and you are going to sign it over tonight." I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. The photographs of the hotel entrance and my old office loading dock were meant to terrify me. They were designed to make me feel small and hunted, like the powerless girl who used to shrink away from the dining room table. But I was not that girl anymore. I did not drop the phone. I did not panic. I took a deliberate screenshot of the message and immediately forwarded the images to Gavin and the hotel's director of security. Within seconds, my phone chimed again. A rapid-fire barrage of text messages flooded in from the same untraceable burner number. The language was foul and dripping with arrogant entitlement. The sender called me an ungrateful spinster who was jealous of a real man providing for his family. He threatened to go to the press with fabricated stories about my personal life, claiming he would tell the world I was a corporate spy who stole company secrets. He promised to make me so universally hated that I would have to flee the country. The digital assault was intended to break my spirit, but it only sharpened my focus. The tone was unmistakably Trey. He was hiding behind a burner phone, but his massive, fragile ego leaked through every single word. I muted the conversation, locked the phone, and walked to the kitchen to pour a glass of water. The sprawling penthouse was dead silent high above the chaotic Chicago streets. I trusted the security protocols Gavin had put in place, but a small knot of tension remained in my chest. At exactly 2 in the morning, the internal intercom on the kitchen wall buzzed. It was a harsh, jarring sound that echoed through the quiet rooms. I pressed the answer button. It was the director of security. His voice was incredibly tense but professionally controlled. "Ms. Mitchell, we have a situation downstairs," he reported. "Two unidentified men just attempted to breach the private elevator bank. They were highly aggressive and physically imposing. They told the lobby staff they were your newly hired private security detail and demanded immediate access to your floor." My grip tightened on the edge of the marble counter. "Did they get past the lobby?" I asked, my voice perfectly steady. "No, ma'am," the security director assured me. "My team intercepted them immediately. We demanded to see their credentials and identification. When they refused and tried to push past the desk, we informed them the Chicago Police Department was already en route. They fled the premises in a dark SUV with obscured license plates. We have their faces on the security cameras, and we are handing the footage over to the authorities. You are completely safe, but we are doubling the guard detail on your floor just to be absolutely certain." I thanked him and ended the call. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the glittering grid of the city. My heart was beating fast, but my mind was operating with crystal clarity. I started connecting the pieces of the puzzle. I replayed the events of the last 72 hours in my head. The frantic Christmas morning phone calls. The 50-page business proposal demanding $50 million wired to an offshore account by Monday. The aggressive probate lawsuit filed within 48 hours. And now hired muscle trying to break into a secure hotel. None of this made sense for a family of their supposed status. Richard was a prominent Winnetka businessman who owned multiple luxury car dealerships. Trey constantly bragged about his massive cryptocurrency hedge fund and his generational wealth. People who are genuinely rich do not hire street thugs to bypass hotel security. Legitimate billionaires do not risk federal prison for extortion and breaking and entering over a civil dispute. Wealthy people let their expensive lawyers fight their battles in air-conditioned courtrooms. They were not just greedy, they were panicking. The manic urgency of Trey's demands suddenly took on a new light. Richard's willingness to leak my name to the tabloids and destroy his own daughters. Life was not just petty revenge. Ashley's immediate pivot to fake tears on a live broadcast was a calculated distraction. It all smelled of raw, blinding desperation. They needed cash, and they needed it right now. The luxury cars, the country club memberships, the designer clothes, it had to be a total facade. The crypto fund was likely bleeding money, or never existed at all. The car dealerships must be drowning in debt. They had backed themselves into a corner, and my lottery ticket was their only way out. I walked back to the kitchen island and picked up my phone. I dialed Gavin's personal cell number. He answered on the first ring despite the late hour. "I just got off the phone with hotel security," Gavin said, his voice thick with anger. "I am pressing charges against whoever hired those goons. This has escalated way past a civil dispute, Nora." I know I told him, but I do not just want to file a police report, I want to destroy them completely. They are hiding something massive, Gavin. Real millionaires do not act like mobsters. They are completely broke and they are terrified. I need someone who can find out exactly what Richard and Trey are covering up. I need someone who operates in the shadows. Gavin exhaled sharply. You need Dexter. He is a corporate private investigator. He used to do forensic financial tracking for the federal government before moving to the private sector. He is expensive, and he does not ask polite questions. Give me his number, I said. 5 minutes later, I was dialing a new number. A man answered with a gruff, gravelly voice. He did not say his name. He just waited for me to speak. My name is Nora Mitchell, I said. Gavin gave me your number. I need you to look into my father Richard Mitchell and my brother-in-law Trey. Do not just look at their public assets or their credit scores. Dig into the dirt. Follow the offshore routing. Find out who they owe money to. I want their entire financial existence ripped open and laid bare on my desk. That level of deep forensic digging requires significant resources. Dexter replied, his tone purely transactional. I am the sole beneficiary of the Horizon Trust, I told him. The funding is virtually unlimited. Consider this a blank check, Dexter. Find out what Trey and Richard are hiding and find it fast. They are acting like men who are about to lose everything. You will have your answers within 48 hours, Dexter promised. The next morning, I walked into Gavin's office and dropped a printed copy of Dexter's dossier onto his polished mahogany desk. Gavin scanned the documents, his eyebrows raising higher with every page. When he reached the details of Trey's Ponzi scheme, a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He looked at me and asked how I wanted to proceed. I told him I did not want to fight their ridiculous syndicate claim defensively. I wanted to go on the offensive. Gavin pointed out a fatal flaw in the lawsuit Richard's sleazy attorney had filed. To prove he purchased the ticket for the family, Richard had willingly submitted 3 months of his personal bank statements to the probate court. In the legal world, opening that door meant Gavin could kick it off its hinges. By noon, Gavin filed a motion to subpoena the entirety of my family's financial records for the past 3 years. The justification was simple. If my parents claimed the lottery ticket was funded by a family syndicate, we needed to verify the syndicate's operational funding and financial health. The trap snapped shut immediately. The sleazy attorney realized his catastrophic mistake within hours. He filed a desperate emergency motion to withdraw the bank statements and seal the records, terrified of exposing the massive fraud. The judge denied the withdrawal. The financial records were officially subpoenaed. My family was backed into a legal corner they had built themselves. The subpoena forced Richard and Trey to legally disclose their debts to the court. The moment those records hit the public docket, the facade shattered. It took less than a day for the gossip to spread through the wealthy enclaves of Winnetka. The society pages and local business blogs picked up the story of the bankrupt car dealership owner and the crypto fraudster's son-in-law. The country club canceled their membership. The people who had attended Ashley's extravagant wedding realized it was paid for with stolen money and predatory loans. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Patricia. Her voice was unrecognizable, stripped of all its haughty arrogance, reduced to hysterical sobbing. She screamed that I had destroyed their reputation, that her friends were ignoring her calls, and that the bank was officially putting our family mansion up for auction the following Friday. She begged me to release the lottery funds, crying that Trey was going to be arrested if they did not pay back the investors. I listened to the entire voicemail with a cup of coffee in my hand. I did not feel a shred of pity. I deleted the message and called Gavin with my next set of instructions. I authorized Gavin to utilize a fraction of my lottery winnings through the Horizon Trust. We approached the primary bank holding the mortgage on the Winnetka mansion, as well as the secondary debt collectors who owned the predatory loans Richard and Trey had desperately taken out. Because the debt was highly distressed and at high risk of default, the banks were thrilled to offload it. Through my anonymous holding company, I legally purchased their entire debt portfolio. I bought the mortgage. I bought the liens on Richard's remaining inventory. I bought the high-interest loans funding Trey's fake crypto lifestyle. I became their sole creditor. Gavin sent a formal legal notice to their attorney. The notice stated that their debt had been acquired by a new corporate entity and required an immediate mandatory mediation session to discuss total asset seizure and foreclosure. The mediation was set for Tuesday morning at Gavin's high-rise law firm in downtown Chicago. I arrived early and waited in a private adjacent room watching through a tinted glass wall as my family strutted into the main conference room. Even facing total ruin, their arrogance was staggering. They believed this mediation was a negotiation with an anonymous banking representative. They thought they could leverage the pending lottery lawsuit to buy themselves more time. Trey wore a custom suit, sweating profusely but trying to play the big shot. He loudly instructed their sleazy lawyer not to accept anything less than $100 million from the lottery settlement to cover their debts. Patricia was clutching her designer handbag like a shield, while Ashley touched up her makeup, completely oblivious to the reality that her influencer career was dead and her husband was a criminal. Richard paced the room, demanding the mediator hurry up so he could save his house. They genuinely thought they still had leverage. They thought my money was their guaranteed bailout. I pushed open the heavy glass door and walked into the conference room. I wore a sharp, tailored suit and carried a thick leather binder containing every single debt note they owed. Richard scoffed the moment he saw me. He demanded to know why I was crashing a private debt mediation, yelling that I needed to sit down and wait my turn to sign over the lottery ticket. I did not say a word. I walked straight to the head of the long glass table and took the mediator's seat. I dropped the heavy leather binder onto the table. The loud thud echoed in the silent room. I looked directly at my father. I told him I was not here to settle the frivolous lottery lawsuit. I told him I was here because the Horizon Trust had purchased his debt. I opened the binder and slid the mortgage documents across the glass. I own the mortgage to the Winnetka house, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I own the liens on your cars. I own the debt from your failed dealerships. I am your sole creditor. The color completely drained from Richard's face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Patricia dropped her designer handbag onto the floor, her hands trembling violently. Ashley stared at the documents in utter disbelief, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the sheer terror spreading across her features. Trey took a step back, his confident facade shattering instantly. He looked at the paperwork, then at me, his eyes wide with the realization that he was completely trapped. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the glass table. You tried to destroy my life over a $20 piece of paper, I said softly. You tried to ruin my reputation and steal my future to cover up your own crimes. But you forgot one crucial detail. I actually work for a living. I know how to manage assets. And now I manage yours. Chaos erupted in the room. Ashley turned on Trey, screaming at the top of her lungs, hitting his chest with her fists, as she realized he had gambled away everything they had. Patricia clutched her chest, gasping for air, hyperventilating, as the reality of her lost social status crushed her. Richard lunged toward the table, screaming that this was illegal, that I could not do this to my own family. My private security team stepped into the room, immediately subduing Richard and forcing him back into his chair. I watched them fall apart without an ounce of sympathy. They had built a life on lies, manipulation, and greed, and now the bill was finally due. I closed the leather binder and stood up, looking down at the people who had tormented me for my entire life. You have 48 hours to vacate my property, I told them, or I will have the sheriff remove you by force. And Trey? I added, turning to my brother-in-law, whose face was slick with terrified sweat. I did not buy your crypto debt. I sent your financial ledger directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Right on cue, the heavy oak doors of the law firm lobby swung open. Sirens wailed down on the Chicago streets below. 2 federal agents walked into the conference room, flashing their badges. They bypassed Richard and walked straight toward Trey, pulling his arms behind his back and snapping cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. Ashley collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably as her husband was dragged away for wire fraud. I walked out of the conference room, leaving them to the destruction they had orchestrated for themselves. 6 months later, the Winnetka mansion was sold, and Richard and Patricia were living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment, completely shunned by the society they had worshipped. I stood on the balcony of my new penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, holding a glass of vintage wine. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. I knew it was Patricia begging for a handout. I smiled, tapped block, and tossed the phone onto the sofa, finally free to live the life I had built. I sat on the plush velvet sofa in the penthouse, the glowing screen of my laptop illuminating the dark room. Dexter's encrypted file was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. It laid bare the rotten core of my family's existence. They had spent decades projecting an image of untouchable wealth, but it was all built on a foundation of lies and predatory debt. I opened the first folder labeled Richard Mitchell Financials. The documentation showed a desperate man trying to plug holes in a sinking ship. Richard's chain of luxury car dealerships had officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy 8 months ago. The inventory had been liquidated, the showrooms shuttered. Yet Patricia had continued to throw lavish dinner parties and buy designer clothes, completely oblivious or willfully ignorant to the fact that her husband was drowning. To maintain their Winnetka lifestyle, Richard had turned to Trey. The second folder labeled Trey Vance Horizon Capital was even more damning. Trey had positioned himself as a financial prodigy, a crypto visionary who could double an investment in weeks. Richard and Patricia, blinded by his expensive suits and arrogant charm, had fallen for it completely. They took out second and third mortgages on the Winnetka mansion. When the banks refused to lend them more money, they turned to private shadow lenders, loan sharks, who charged extortionate interest rates and did not operate within the bounds of the law. They pumped millions into Trey's fund, but Trey was not investing in cryptocurrency. He was running a classic Ponzi scheme. He used the incoming capital from Richard and other gullible investors to pay off early stakeholders, creating the illusion of massive returns. The rest of the money he siphoned into offshore accounts to fund his and Ashley's extravagant lifestyle. The $17,000 Mediterranean cruise they bragged about on Christmas Eve, it was paid for with stolen money. I scrolled down to the final section of Dexter's report. The summary was stark and terrifying. Trey's fund had completely collapsed. The new investments had dried up, and the early investors were demanding their payouts. Trey owed furious investors, loan sharks, and the Internal Revenue Service a combined $15 million. The shadow lenders were circling, demanding their money with escalating threats. The IRS had initiated a formal investigation into Trey's offshore accounts. The timeline was absolute. If Trey did not produce $15 million by the end of the month, the FBI would arrest him for wire fraud and tax evasion. Simultaneously, the primary bank holding the mortgage on the Winnetka mansion had initiated foreclosure proceedings. My parents were days away from being locked out of their home. I closed the laptop and took a deep breath. The panic I had witnessed on Christmas morning suddenly made perfect sense. They did not want my lottery ticket because they were greedy. They wanted it because it was their only lifeline. They were literally facing federal prison and homelessness, and they had planned to use me as their personal bailout fund. I picked up my phone and called Gavin. It was 4 a.m, but I knew he would be awake. I have the entire picture, I told him, my voice steady and cold. Richard is bankrupt. Trey is running a Ponzi scheme. They owe $15 million to the IRS and private lenders. They are facing foreclosure and federal indictments by the end of the month. Gavin let out a low whistle. That explains the extreme aggression with the probate lawsuit and the hired muscle. They are fighting for their lives, Nora. They are fighting for a life they stole, I corrected him. I do not want to just defend against their syndicate claim, Gavin. I want to use it against them. If Richard is claiming he bought that ticket with pooled family funds, he has to prove the family actually had funds to pool. I could hear the smile in Gavin's voice. You want to subpoena their financials? Exactly, I said. They opened the door by submitting 3 months of bank statements to the probate court. I want to kick that door off its hinges. I want you to file a motion demanding the entirety of their financial records for the past 3 years. I want every bank account, every mortgage document, every tax return dragged out into the light of the public docket. It is a brilliant tactical move, Gavin agreed, the sound of rapid typing echoing through the phone. Briggs will try to block it, of course. He will file an emergency motion to seal the records or withdraw the initial statements, but the judge will not allow it. Once evidence is submitted to support a claim, it becomes subject to discovery. We have them trapped, Nora. File it first thing in the morning, I instructed. Let us see how much they really want to play this game. By 10 a.m, Gavin's litigation team filed the motion. The response from Leonard Briggs was instantaneous and panicked. Just as Gavin predicted, Briggs filed an emergency motion to withdraw the bank statements and seal the records, citing privacy concerns. It was a desperate, transparent attempt to hide the massive fraud. The judge, a seasoned probate veteran with no patience for frivolous litigation, denied Briggs' motion flatly. The financial records were officially subpoenaed. Richard, Patricia, Ashley, and Trey were legally compelled to disclose their entire financial existence to the court. The trap had snapped shut. The moment those records hit the public docket, the facade my family had spent decades building shattered completely. The society pages and local business blogs in Chicago pick up the story within hours. The narrative shifted instantly. The ungrateful tech worker story Briggs had spun was replaced by the shocking revelation of the bankrupt car dealership owner and the crypto fraudster's son-in-law. My phone buzzed with a voicemail. It was Patricia. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was stripped of all its haughty arrogance, reduced to frantic, hysterical sobbing. "Nora, please, you have to stop this," Patricia screamed into the phone, her breathing ragged and panicked. "The country club just canceled our membership. My friends will not even look at me. The bank sent the final foreclosure notice today. We are going to lose the house next Friday. Trey is terrified he is going to be arrested. You have to release the funds, Nora. You have to save us. Please. We are your family." I listened to the entire voicemail standing by the panoramic window of the penthouse, looking out at the cold gray waters of Lake Michigan. I did not feel a shred of pity. I felt absolute clarity. They had spent my entire life tearing me down, minimizing my accomplishments, and treating me like an inconvenience. When they were desperate, they had tried to steal from me and destroy my reputation. They had built a life on lies, manipulation, and greed, and now the bill was finally due. I deleted the voicemail and called Gavin. "The records are public," I said. "They are exposed. But I want to go a step further. I want to take complete control of the board." Gavin paused. "What do you have in mind, Nora?" I authorized Gavin to utilize a fraction of my lottery winnings through the Horizon Trust. We were not going to pay off their debts to save them. We were going to buy their debts to own them. We approached the primary bank holding the mortgage on the Winnetka mansion. We also approached the secondary debt collectors who owned the predatory loans Richard and Trey had taken out. Because the debt was highly distressed and at extreme risk of default, the banks and collectors were thrilled to offload it for pennies on the dollar. Through my anonymous holding company, I legally purchased their entire debt portfolio. I bought the mortgage to the Winnetka mansion. I bought the liens on Richard's remaining car inventory. I bought the high-interest loans funding Trey's fake crypto lifestyle. I became their sole creditor. Gavin sent a formal legal notice to Leonard Briggs. The notice stated that their debt had been acquired by a new corporate entity and required an immediate mandatory mediation session to discuss total asset seizure and foreclosure. The mediation was set for Tuesday morning at Gavin's high-rise law firm in downtown Chicago. I arrived early and waited in a private adjacent room, watching through a tinted glass wall as my family strutted into the main conference room. Even facing total ruin, their arrogance was staggering. They believed this mediation was a negotiation with an anonymous banking representative. They thought they could leverage the pending lottery lawsuit to buy themselves more time. Trey wore a custom suit, sweating profusely but trying to play the big shot. He loudly instructed Briggs not to accept anything less than $100 million from the lottery settlement to cover their debts. Patricia was clutching her designer handbag like a shield, while Ashley touched up her makeup, completely oblivious to the reality that her influencer career was dead and her husband was a criminal. Richard paced the room, demanding the mediator hurry up so he could save his house. They genuinely thought they still had leverage. They thought my money was their guaranteed bailout. I pushed open the heavy glass door and walked into the conference room. I wore a sharp, tailored suit and carried a thick leather binder containing every single debt note they owed. Richard scoffed the moment he saw me. He demanded to know why I was crashing a private debt mediation, yelling that I needed to sit down and wait my turn to sign over the lottery ticket. I did not say a word. I walked straight to the head of the long glass table and took the mediator's seat. I dropped the heavy leather binder onto the table. The loud thud echoed in the silent room. I looked directly at my father. I am not here to settle the frivolous lottery lawsuit, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I am here because the Horizon Trust purchased your debt. I opened the binder and slid the mortgage documents across the glass. I own the mortgage to the Winnetka house, I said. I own the liens on your cars. I own the debt from your failed dealerships. I am your sole creditor. The color completely drained from Richard's face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Patricia dropped her designer handbag onto the floor, her hands trembling violently. Ashley stared at the documents in utter disbelief, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the sheer terror spreading across her features. Trey took a step back, his confident facade shattering instantly. He looked at the paperwork, then at me, his eyes wide with the realization that he was completely trapped. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the glass table. You tried to destroy my life over a $20 piece of paper, I said softly. You tried to ruin my reputation and steal my future to cover up your own crimes. But you forgot one crucial detail. I actually work for a living. I know how to manage assets. And now, I manage yours. Chaos erupted in the room. Ashley turned on Trey, screaming at the top of her lungs, hitting his chest with her fists, as she realized he had gambled away everything they had. Patricia clutched her chest, gasping for air, hyperventilating as the reality of her lost social status crushed her. Richard lunged toward the table, screaming that this was illegal, that I could not do this to my own family. My private security team stepped into the room, immediately subduing Richard and forcing him back into his chair. I watched them fall apart without an ounce of sympathy. They had built a life on lies, manipulation, and greed, and now the bill was finally due. I closed the leather binder and stood up, looking down at the people who had tormented me for my entire life. You have 48 hours to vacate my property, I told them, or I will have the sheriff remove you by force. And Trey, I added, turning to my brother-in-law, whose face was slick with terrified sweat. I did not buy your crypto debt. I sent your financial ledger directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Right on cue, the heavy oak doors of the law firm lobby swung open. Sirens wailed down on the Chicago streets below. 2 federal agents walked into the conference room, flashing their badges. They bypassed Richard and walked straight toward Trey, pulling his arms behind his back and snapping cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. Ashley collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably as her husband was dragged away for wire fraud. I walked out of the conference room, leaving them to the destruction they had orchestrated for themselves. 6 months later, the Winnetka mansion was sold, and Richard and Patricia were living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment, completely shunned by the society they had worshipped. I stood on the balcony of my new penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, holding a glass of vintage wine. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. I knew it was Patricia, begging for a handout. I smiled, tapped block, and tossed the phone onto the sofa, finally free to live the life I had built. The gavel came down and the trap snapped completely shut. With the emergency withdrawal denied, Richard had no legal avenue left to hide. By the close of business on Thursday, his sleazy lawyer was forced to submit the unredacted financial records to the Cook County Probate Court. In the legal world, court filings are public record. Anyone with an internet connection and a basic understanding of how to search the county docket could access them. It took exactly 4 hours for the wealthy enclaves of Winnetka to discover that Richard and Patricia Mitchell were absolute frauds. The records painted a picture of staggering financial devastation. The documents showed that Richard's luxury car dealerships had not just underperformed, they had been completely insolvent for 8 months. To keep up appearances and fund Ashley's extravagant wedding, Richard and Patricia had secretly taken out a second and then a third mortgage on their sprawling estate. But traditional banks had eventually cut them off. The most damning pages of the subpoena revealed wire transfers to and from known shadow lenders, loan sharks who charged extortionate interest rates and did not care about the law when it came to collecting their dues. Worse, the records exposed the black hole where all that borrowed money went. Trey. Millions of dollars had been funneled directly into Trey's supposed crypto hedge fund, which the documents proved was nothing more than a desperate Ponzi scheme. There were no digital assets, There was only a mountain of stolen cash used to pay off early investors and fund a fake billionaire lifestyle. Combined, the family was buried under $15 million of toxic debt owed to predatory lenders, furious defrauded investors, and the Internal Revenue Service. The social fallout was instant and merciless. In high society, blood in the water attracts sharks faster than any corporate merger. By Friday morning, the local society blogs and Chicago business columns had published the court records. The country club where my parents had spent decades looking down their noses at people instantly revoked their membership. Ashley's former influencer friends publicly distanced themselves, scrubbing her from their social media feeds like she was a virus. The people who had attended that lavish wedding realized they had been drinking champagne paid for with stolen money and criminal loans. I was sitting at the glass dining table in my secure hotel penthouse, reviewing the newly public docket, when my phone vibrated. It was a blocked number, but I knew exactly who it was. I let it go straight to voicemail. 2 minutes later, an audio file appeared on my screen. I tapped play and set the phone down. Patricia's voice filled the quiet penthouse. She was not using her authoritative matriarch tone. She was screaming, her voice ragged and breathless with hysterical panic. "Nora, you have destroyed us!" Patricia wailed into the receiver. "Are you happy now? You dragged our private family matters into a public courtroom and now everyone knows. My friends will not even answer my calls. The country club security literally escorted your father off the golf course this morning. You ruined our reputation over a petty grudge." I listened to her unhinged revision of reality with pure clinical detachment. She was still blaming me. She was blaming me for the fact that she and Richard had borrowed millions from criminals and handed it to a con artist. "Trey is terrified," Patricia sobbed, her voice cracking. "The people he owes money to are calling the house Nora. Dangerous people, and the bank just sent the final notice. They are putting the Winnetka house up for public auction next Friday. We are going to be thrown out on the street. You have to release the lottery funds right now. You have to call the judge and tell them to give us the money. You owe us this. You have to save your family." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel the urge to call her back and gloat. Gloating was for people who needed validation. I just needed results. Patricia and Richard were drowning, and they were furious that I refused to be their life raft. They had spent my entire life minimizing my existence, telling me I was a failure because I worked an honest job instead of marrying a wealthy fraud. Now the bill for their arrogance had finally come due. I deleted the voicemail and immediately dialed Gavin. He answered on the first ring, sounding incredibly energized. "The subpoena did exactly what we wanted," Gavin said, the sound of shuffling papers echoing over the line. "The family syndicate claim is effectively dead in the water. No judge will award a lottery payout to a group of people currently under investigation by the IRS for operating a Ponzi scheme. We can file to dismiss their injunction on Monday." "We are not just dismissing the injunction," I told him, standing up and walking over to the panoramic windows overlooking Lake Michigan. "I want to completely neutralize them, Gavin. I want to make sure they can never threaten me, sue me, or attempt to manipulate my life ever again." Gavin paused. "What exactly do you have in mind, Nora?" "I do not want to pay off their debts to save them," I said, my voice perfectly calm and razor sharp. "I want to buy their debts to own them." I explained the strategy. The banks holding the multiple mortgages on the Winnetka mansion were dealing with a highly distressed asset. The secondary debt collectors handling Richard's failed business loans knew they were likely never going to see a dime from a bankrupt car salesman facing federal scrutiny. The debt was toxic. That meant those financial institutions would be absolutely thrilled to offload it for pennies on the dollar just to clear it off their books. "I want the Horizon Trust to approach the primary bank and every single secondary creditor," I instructed Gavin. "Use a fraction of the lottery winnings. I want to legally purchase their entire debt portfolio, buy the mortgages, buy the liens on the cars, buy the business loans. I want to become their sole creditor." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a low, impressed breath. "That is highly aggressive," Nora, Gavin said. It is entirely legal, but it is financially ruthless. If we buy the debt notes, you hold all the cards. You dictate the terms of foreclosure. You dictate the asset seizure. Execute the purchases today, I ordered. I want to own the roof over their heads by Monday morning. And once the ink is dry, I want you to send Leonard Briggs a very specific legal notice. Tell him their debt has been acquired by a new anonymous holding company and require an immediate mandatory mediation session to discuss total asset seizure. Consider it done, Gavin said. I hung up the phone. I looked out at the sprawling Chicago skyline. My family had tried to use the legal system to freeze my assets and force me into submission. They thought they were the predators. They had no idea they had just walked right into a cage and handed me the only key. Gavin did not waste a single second. Within an hour of my authorization, he mobilized a specialized acquisitions team within his wealth management firm. They operated with the kind of ruthless, silent efficiency that only billions of dollars can buy. We established a new, completely anonymous shell corporation under the umbrella of the Horizon Trust. We called it Ironclad Holdings. Its sole purpose was to serve as the legal entity that would swallow my family's financial existence whole. The first target was the primary bank holding the mortgage on the Winnetka mansion. Richard and Patricia had remortgaged the property twice, draining its equity, to maintain their country club facade, and to blindly fund Trey's fraudulent crypto ventures. Because Richard's car dealerships were already in Chapter 11 bankruptcy and the residential mortgage was severely delinquent, the bank classified the debt as highly toxic. Banks detest carrying toxic assets on their books, especially when the debtor is simultaneously being investigated by the IRS. When Ironclad Holdings offered to purchase the entire mortgage portfolio in cash, the bank executives did not ask questions. They accepted a massive discount just to wash their hands of the Mitchell family. The ink was dry in less than 24 hours. The secondary loans were slightly more complicated but equally vulnerable. Trey had secured millions in short-term high-interest loans from shadow lenders and private equity sharks who operated on the fringes of the law. These lenders were currently panicking, having realized that Trey was a fraud running a Ponzi scheme and that federal agents were circling. Gavin used a network of intermediary brokers to approach these private lenders with a simple, non-negotiable offer. We would buy Trey's debt notes for 50 cents on the dollar, paid instantly via secure wire transfer. The lenders, eager to avoid FBI scrutiny and desperate to recoup any part of their terrible investment, eagerly signed over the promissory notes. I sat at the massive marble kitchen island in my secure hotel penthouse, watching the confirmation emails roll into my encrypted inbox. I was reviewing the legal transfers with the same clinical detached focus I used when auditing a broken user interface at my old tech job. The system my parents had built was fundamentally flawed, running on arrogance and manipulation. I was simply executing a hard reset. It cost me just under $6 million in liquid cash to acquire a debt portfolio worth over $15 million. $6 million was a staggering amount of money to a normal person. For me, it was less than 1% of my lottery winnings. It was pocket change. But that pocket change purchased absolute, undeniable power. I officially owned the roof over my parents' heads. I owned the liens on the remaining inventory of my father's ruined dealerships. I owned the promissory notes that could send Trey to federal prison the moment a collection demand was ignored. I held the physical legal leverage to dismantle their entire lives with a single signature. Once the final acquisition was legally recorded with Cook County, I called Gavin. "The board is set," I told him, looking out at the freezing waters of Lake Michigan. "Drop the hammer." Gavin drafted the formal notices with surgical precision. There was no mention of my name, the lottery, or the Horizon Trust. The documents were strictly business, printed on the heavy, intimidating letterhead of a premier Chicago law firm representing Ironclad Holdings. On Monday morning, a black town car pulled up to the sweeping driveway of the Winnetka mansion. A professional process server stepped out, walked past my father's aging luxury cars, and rang the doorbell. I later learned from the process server's affidavit that Richard opened the door looking haggard and exhausted, still wearing his bathrobe at 10 in the morning. He begrudgingly signed for the thick manila envelope, likely assuming it was just another threatening letter from a defrauded investor or a bank collector. It was far worse. The formal legal notice bluntly informed Richard, Patricia, Ashley, and Trey that their disparate debts had been consolidated and entirely acquired by Ironclad Holdings. The new creditor was exercising its legal right to demand immediate repayment in full. Because the debt was in severe default, the notice bypassed standard collection agencies and moved straight to the final warning. The letter demanded their mandatory attendance at an emergency mediation session scheduled for the very next morning at Gavin's downtown law firm. The terms outlined in the notice were brutally clear. They were to arrive prepared to surrender all collateral assets, including the deeds to their vehicles, the title to the Winnetka estate, and the remaining corporate assets of the dealerships. Failure to attend the mediation or failure to agree to the asset seizure would result in immediate forced eviction by the county sheriff and the simultaneous forwarding of all financial irregularities to the federal authorities. They were cornered. They had no money to hire a competent defense attorney. Their sleazy probate lawyer Leonard Briggs was entirely useless against a corporate takeover of this magnitude. He was looking for a quick payday from a lottery ticket, not a grueling, unwinnable war against an anonymous corporate giant holding legally binding promissory notes. Briggs advised them they had no choice but to attend the mediation and beg the new creditor for a grace period or a structured surrender of the properties. My phone remained completely silent. They could not call me to scream or beg because they had absolutely no idea that I was the phantom creditor orchestrating their downfall. They believed I was just a bitter, ungrateful daughter hiding from the media completely separate from this new financial nightmare. I spent Monday evening carefully selecting my outfit for the mediation. I bypassed the casual clothes I usually wore to the tech office and chose a razor-sharp tailored designer suit. I laid it out perfectly, feeling a cold, steady anticipation building in my chest. Tomorrow they were going to walk into a glass-walled conference room, expecting to beg a faceless banker for mercy. They had no idea they were walking straight into an execution. Tuesday morning arrived with a biting chill that swept off the lake and rattled the glass windows of downtown Chicago. Inside the 75th floor conference room of Gavin's law firm, the climate control was set to a perfect 72 degrees. The room was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation, featuring soundproof glass walls, a massive polished marble table, and ergonomic leather chairs that cost more than most people's cars. From the adjacent private viewing room, I watched them through the tinted glass wall. They had literally been served eviction notices. They were drowning in predatory debt. The federal authorities were likely already drafting Trey's arrest warrant. Yet they strutted into the mediation room like royalty arriving to collect a tribute. Patricia entered first, clutching her vintage Birkin bag, like a physical shield against her own bankruptcy. She wore a tailored cashmere coat, looking down her nose at the junior associates, who offered her sparkling water. Richard marched in right behind her, his chest puffed out in a pathetic attempt to project the authority of a wealthy corporate executive. He barked an order at their sleazy attorney, Leonard Briggs, telling him to pull out a chair for Patricia. Ashley dragged her feet as she walked in, staring obsessively at her phone screen. Her influencer career was entirely dead, but she was still checking her social media metrics, running her thumb over the screen with a frantic, panicked energy. But it was Trey who gave away their true desperation. He was wearing a custom-tailored Italian suit, but the collar of his shirt was already damp with sweat. He kept pacing the length of the conference room, running a hand over his freshly shaved head. He was trying to play the alpha male, the untouchable crypto founder, but his eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal. He knew his defrauded investors were looking for him. He knew the loan sharks were running out of patience. I flipped a switch on the wall console that allowed me to hear the audio from the conference room without them hearing me. "Listen to me, Briggs," Trey snapped, stopping at the head of the marble table and pointing a trembling finger at the lawyer. "When this anonymous banking rep comes in, we take control of the narrative immediately. You tell them we are the plaintiffs in an $800 million probate lawsuit, We have a guaranteed payout coming from that lottery ticket. Richard nodded vigorously, taking a seat next to Patricia. Exactly. Tell them the family syndicate case is a slam dunk. We will offer to settle our outstanding debt notes using the lottery funds, but they have to back off the foreclosure immediately. We are not giving up the Winnetka house. And do not accept any lowball counteroffers, Trey added, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple. We pay off the distressed debt, but we walk away with at least $100 million in liquid cash from the settlement. I need that capital to restructure my board and silence my investors. Do not let these corporate suits bully you, Briggs. We hold the golden ticket. We have all the leverage. It was a breathtaking display of mass delusion. They genuinely believed that suing me had magically transformed my lottery winnings into their personal checking account. They thought this anonymous holding company had called them here to negotiate a split of my money. They thought they were going to pay off their criminal debts, save their mansion, and walk away $100 million richer just by dangling my name in front of a bank. Patricia sighed loudly, examining her reflection in the glass table. I just want this nightmare over with. I cannot believe Nora is forcing us to go through all this red tape. If she had just been a dutiful daughter and signed the ticket over on Christmas, none of us would be suffering this indignity. I had heard enough. I picked up the thick, heavy leather binder containing the original copies of every single mortgage loan and promissory note they owed. I smoothed the lapels of my dark designer suit. I took a deep breath, feeling a cold, absolute calm wash over my entire body. I walked out of the viewing room and headed straight for the heavy oak doors of the main conference room. Inside the room, Briggs was busy organizing his meaningless probate files. Trey was still pacing, and Richard was tapping his designer pen impatiently against the marble. They were waiting for a faceless corporate banker to walk through those doors and beg for a piece of their imaginary fortune. I turned the brass handle and pushed the heavy doors open. The sharp thud of my heels clicking against the hardwood floor instantly silenced the room. 4 heads snapped in my direction, expecting a man in a gray suit. Instead, they saw me. Richard scoffed the moment his brain processed my presence. The initial shock on his face rapidly curdled into indignant fury. He slammed his hand down on the marble table, making his water glass rattle. "What on earth are you doing here?" Richard demanded, half rising from his ergonomic leather chair. "This is a private corporate mediation. If you are here to grovel about the lottery settlement, you can sit out in the lobby and wait your turn. We are dealing with real business right now." Patricia let out an exaggerated sigh, rubbing her temples as if my mere existence was triggering a migraine. Honestly, Nora, the sheer desperation is embarrassing. Crashing a closed-door meeting just to throw a tantrum. Leonard, please have security remove her. Leonard Briggs, their sleazy attorney, stood up and puffed out his chest, attempting to project legal authority. "Ms. Mitchell, I must ask you to leave immediately. This room is reserved for my clients and the representatives of Ironclad Holdings. You are interfering with a highly sensitive financial negotiation. If you do not exit, I will have you cited for harassment." I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I simply walked past Briggs as if he were entirely invisible. I moved straight to the head of the long glass table, the seat reserved for the mediator, and took my place. I placed the thick leather binder squarely in the center of the table. "I am not here to settle your frivolous lottery lawsuit," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, "and I am not here to negotiate." Trey let out a harsh, mocking laugh, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms over his custom suit. "Then why are you sitting in the big chair, Nora? Did you get lost on your way to the unemployment office? We are waiting for the bank. Move." I unclasped the heavy leather binder and opened it flat against the glass. The sharp sound echoed in the quiet room, drawing every eye to the stacks of dense legal paperwork inside. I pulled out the first thick packet of documents and slid it smoothly down the length of the table. It came to a stop directly in front of my father. "I am here because my trust bought your debt," I stated. The room went instantly suffocatingly still. Richard stared at the document sitting in front of him. His eyes darted to the bold print at the top of the page. It was the deed of trust for the Winnetka mansion, complete with the official transfer of ownership stamps from Cook County. "What is this?" Richard breathed, his voice suddenly lacking all of its previous booming authority. That is the primary mortgage on your estate, I explained calmly. Your bank classified it as a toxic asset because you are severely delinquent and currently under federal investigation. They were absolutely thrilled to offload it for pennies on the dollar, so I bought it. Patricia dropped her vintage Birkin bag. It hit the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. You bought our mortgage with what money you cannot possibly— With the lottery money, I interrupted, cutting her off completely. The Horizon Trust is the parent entity of Ironclad Holdings. The anonymous corporate creditor you came here to beg for mercy today is me. I pulled out the next stack of documents and slid them toward Patricia. Those are the second and third mortgages you secretly took out to fund Ashley's wedding and maintain your country club membership. I bought those too. I turned my gaze to Trey. His smug, arrogant posture had entirely dissolved. He was gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles were white. I slid the largest, thickest stack of paperwork directly into his chest. And those are the promissory notes from the shadow lenders and private equity sharks you defrauded to pump up your fake crypto hedge fund, I told my brother-in-law. The men you owe millions of dollars to were panicking about the FBI closing in. They sold your debt notes to my holding company last night. I own every single fraudulent loan you signed your name to. Ashley looked frantically between Trey, my parents, and the massive piles of legal documents dominating the conference table. She reached out and grabbed Trey's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. Trey, what is she talking about? Tell her she is lying. Tell her we are getting the $100 million. Trey did not answer her. He could not even look at her. He was staring at the promissory notes, his chest heaving as he struggled to draw a breath. The reality of his absolute ruin was suffocating him in real time. Leonard Briggs snatched the mortgage document from in front of Richard, his eyes scanning the legal transfer seals. I watched the sleazy lawyer process the information. He looked at the corporate signatures, then looked up at me, a profound realization washing over his face. He realized he had marched his clients into a slaughterhouse. He slowly lowered the paper back onto the table and took a distinct step away from Richard, physically distancing himself from the sinking ship. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool glass. I locked eyes with my father. I own the mortgage to the Winnetka house, I said, enunciating every single word with lethal precision. I own the liens on your luxury cars. I own the debt from your failed bankrupt dealerships. I am your sole creditor. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Richard sat frozen in his ergonomic leather chair. His mouth opened slightly, but his vocal cords completely failed him. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. His hands trembled where they rested on the glass table. He looked at the documents, then up at the daughter he had mocked, belittled, and treated like an inconvenience for 33 years. The utter arrogance that had defined his entire existence evaporated into thin air. The color continued to drain from Richard's face as the crushing, inescapable truth finally took hold. He realized his own daughter literally owned his entire life. The realization did not just break Richard, it shattered the entire room. Pure, unadulterated chaos erupted the second the weight of my words fully registered. Patricia let out a strangled, gasping noise, clutching her chest, as if she had been physically struck. She slumped forward, her manicured hands scrabbling desperately at the edge of the glass table for support. She was hyperventilating, taking short, panicked breaths, as the reality of her lost social status and impending homelessness crushed the air out of her lungs. Ashley, however, did not freeze. She turned her head slowly toward her husband. The flawless influencer mask she wore every single day melted away, exposing a look of pure, feral horror. "You lost it!" Ashley shrieked, her voice cracking into a hysterical pitch. "You lost everything. The wedding money, the house, the investments. You told me the crypto fund was generating 30% yields, Trey. You told me we were buying a compound in Beverly Hills." Trey held up his hands, backing away from her, his face slick with sweat. "Ash, baby, listen to me. I can fix this. It is just a temporary liquidity issue. I just need a bridge loan to cover the margin calls." "A bridge loan?" Ashley screamed, lunging at him. You are a fraud. You stole my parents' retirement. You ruined my life. Before Trey could utter another pathetic excuse, Ashley raised her hand and slapped him directly across the face. The sharp, violent crack of her palm hitting his cheek echoed like a gunshot through the mediation room. Trey stumbled backward, knocking over a leather chair. Leonard Briggs, the sleazy attorney, had seen enough. He frantically shoved his legal pads into his briefcase, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. "I am withdrawing as counsel," he stammered, backing toward the heavy oak doors. "This syndicate claim is dead. I am not getting disbarred for a fraud ring." He practically ran out of the room, leaving my family entirely defenseless. Trey touched his stinging cheek, his eyes darting frantically around the room until they locked onto me. The panic in his expression instantly twisted into explosive, violent rage. He blamed me. In his twisted, narcissistic mind, I was the reason his Ponzi scheme was collapsing. I was the reason his wife hated him. I was the one holding the match to his house of cards. "You did this, you vindictive brat!" Trey roared, his voice completely unhinged. "You set us up. I am going to tear you apart." Trey lunged forward, hurling his massive frame across the room directly at me. He raised his fist, aiming straight for my head. I did not even flinch. I did not have to. Before Trey could take a second step, my private security detail moved with terrifying precision. Two heavily armed professionals who had been standing silently by the entrance surged forward. The first guard grabbed Trey's extended arm, twisting it sharply behind his back. The second guard slammed a heavy hand into the back of Trey's neck, driving his face directly into the polished glass of the conference table. The impact rattled the marble base. Trey groaned in pain, struggling uselessly against the two guards who had him hopelessly pinned to the surface. "Do not move a single muscle," the lead security guard warned, pressing his weight into Trey's shoulder. I stood up from the head of the table, brushing a speck of dust off my tailored suit. I looked down at my family, watching them tremble in the wreckage of their own making. Richard was staring blankly at the wall, a completely broken man. Patricia was still sobbing into her hands. Ashley was backed into a corner, shaking with fear. "You have exactly one chance to walk out of this building without being completely destroyed," I announced, my voice carrying absolute authority. "I am going to place a set of documents on this table. You are going to sign every single page." I reached into my leather binder and pulled out the surrender agreements Gavin had drafted the night before. I slid them across the glass toward my father. "These documents dictate a total and unconditional surrender," I explained. "First, you will sign a legally binding agreement, dropping your frivolous lottery lawsuit with prejudice, meaning you can never sue me for those funds again. Second, you will sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. You will never speak my name to the press. You will never mention this mediation. You will never contact me again." Richard stared at the paperwork, his hands shaking. "And if we refuse," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "If you refuse, I will execute the foreclosure on the Winnetka mansion today," I promised coldly. "I will have the county sheriff physically throw you out onto the street this afternoon. I will seize the remaining assets of the car dealerships, and I will ensure that every single country club associate you have left knows exactly how you stole your daughter's college fund to pay for a fraudster. Sign the papers, Richard, or lose it all right now." My father did not argue. He did not yell. He picked up the pen with trembling fingers and signed his name on the dotted lines. He passed the packet to Patricia, who blindly scribbled her signature through her tears. Ashley snatched the pen next, hastily signing away her right to ever bother me again, desperate to escape the nightmare she had helped create. They pushed the signed documents back across the table. I picked them up, checking the signatures to ensure everything was properly executed. I slipped them back into my leather binder, snapping it shut. "You can keep the house for now," I told my parents, securing my briefcase. "You will pay me rent on the first of every month. If you miss a single payment, the eviction stands. Now get out of my sight." Richard and Patricia slowly stood up, leaning on each other for support. They looked hollowed out, stripped of all their arrogant pride. Ashley followed them, keeping her head down, refusing to look at me or her husband. They shuffled out of the conference room, a pathetic shadow of the powerful family they pretended to be. I turned my attention back to the table where Trey was still pinned against the glass, sweating profusely and breathing heavily. "Let him up," I instructed my security team. The guards stepped back, releasing their grip. Trey immediately scrambled backward, adjusting his ruined suit collar. He glared at me, his chest heaving. "You think you are so smart?" Nora Trey spat, trying to regain a shred of his dignity. "You think buying my debt makes you a genius? You overpaid. My investors are going to rip you apart trying to collect. You just bought yourself a $15 million headache." I looked at him and smiled. It was a genuine bright smile. "Oh, Trey," I said, shaking my head slightly. "You really are not very bright, are you? I told you I bought the mortgage. I told you I bought the car liens. I never said I bought your crypto debt." Trey's arrogant scowl vanished instantly. His eyes went wide. "What are you talking about? I would never buy toxic debt from a failing Ponzi scheme." I explained, my tone almost conversational. "I did not spend a single cent on your promissory notes, Trey, but my private investigator did find your hidden offshore routing numbers. He found the fake investment ledger. He found the exact amounts you skimmed from your victims." Trey took a stumbling step backward, his back hitting the glass wall of the conference room. "What did you do?" "I forwarded your entire unredacted financial ledger to the Securities and Exchange Commission," I told him, leaning forward slightly. "And I carbon copied the Chicago field office of the FBI." Right on cue, the faint sound of approaching sirens drifted through the thick glass windows of the high-rise building. The wailing grew louder, echoing through the downtown canyons, multiplying as multiple vehicles converged on the street below. Trey looked wildly toward the windows, then back at me, absolute terror consuming his features. The sirens were deafening now, pulling right up to the front entrance of the law firm. "The bill is due, Trey," I said, "and your ride is here." The heavy oak doors of the conference room swung open with enough force to rattle the glass walls. 4 federal agents stepped inside, their badges flashing under the harsh fluorescent lights of the law firm. They did not hesitate, they did not ask for permission, and they certainly did not care about the delicate sensibilities of my parents. 2 agents bypassed my frozen, terrified mother and walked directly toward Trey. They grabbed his arm, spinning his massive frame around and slamming him forcefully against the glass wall. The cold metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the silent room, sounding like the final definitive period at the end of a very long sentence. Trey tried to stammer out a defense, his arrogant facade completely dissolving into pathetic, blubbering panic. He begged the agents to look at his fabricated offshore accounts, insisting there was a misunderstanding with the ledgers. The lead agent did not even blink, simply reading him his Miranda rights in a flat-board monotone. Ashley stood completely paralyzed. Her carefully applied makeup was ruined by streaks of mascara, and her hands shook violently. She watched the man she had relentlessly flaunted as a financial genius, the man she used to use to mock my honest living, being hauled away like a common street criminal. The illusion of her high-value husband shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of her eyes. As the agents dragged a weeping Trey out into the hallway, parading him past the staring paralegals and receptionists, the reality of the situation finally hit my sister. Her massive social media following was already gone, her lucrative brand deals were permanently canceled. Her husband was facing decades in federal prison for operating a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. She had absolutely nothing left to fall back on, and the wealthy lifestyle she felt so inherently entitled to was officially over. For Richard and Patricia, the fall from grace was absolute and merciless. Exactly 48 hours after the mediation, a fleet of moving trucks and 2 Cook County sheriffs arrived at the Winnetka mansion. I did not show up to gloat. I let the legal system handle the eviction with cold, bureaucratic efficiency. My parents were forced to pack whatever meager personal belongings they could fit into a rented moving van, while the sheriff stood watch on the front porch. The neighbors' people, my parents had spent years trying to impress with their fake wealth, stood on their perfectly manicured lawns and watched the humiliating spectacle unfold. The luxury cars in the driveway were seized and towed away by the bank recovery teams. The sprawling estate where they had hosted lavish holiday parties and relentlessly mocked my existence was officially locked, shuttered, and placed on the market under the Horizon Trust. They were forced to downsize to a tiny, rundown two-bedroom apartment on the far outskirts of the city, a cramped space in a neighborhood they used to actively mock at their elite country club dinners. Their high society friends completely abandoned them. The socialites who used to drink Patricia's vintage champagne now actively crossed the street to avoid her, terrified of being associated with a family tied to a federal fraud investigation. Richard tried desperately to secure a loan from his former business partners, but his name was pure poison in the Chicago financial sector. No one would take his calls. No one would offer them a lifeline. They were entirely exposed as frauds, stripped of their wealth, their status, and their unearned pride. A week later, Leonard Briggs officially withdrew the frivolous probate lawsuit. He submitted the paperwork quietly, desperate to distance himself from the radioactive fallout of my family's criminal enterprise. I could have countersued them for legal fees. I could have dragged Richard and Patricia through the courts for years, draining whatever miserable scraps they had left in their bank accounts. But I chose a different, much more devastating path. I instructed Gavin to drop all counterclaims. I completely withdrew my legal presence from their lives. I did not want their apologies, and I certainly did not want their money. Leaving them to rot in the prison of their own making, trapped in a tiny apartment with nothing but their bitter regrets, was the ultimate punishment. By dropping the case, I severed the final thread that connected us. They were no longer my family, my adversaries, or my responsibility. They were simply strangers who owed me a lifetime of silence. With the toxic anchor of my family finally cut loose, I fully transitioned into my new life of absolute freedom. The massive lottery payout cleared landing securely within the impenetrable accounts of the Horizon Trust. I did not buy a fleet of sports cars or a private island. I kept my identity completely anonymous to the public, ensuring my peace remained undisturbed. I upgraded my living situation to a stunning, highly secure penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, a quiet sanctuary where no one could ever barge in uninvited. I retained Gavin and his elite team of financial advisors to manage my wealth, ensuring my assets grew exponentially while remaining completely shielded from predators. I had executed a clean, legal, and devastating extraction from a family that only ever saw me as a punching bag. The girl who used to sit silently at the end of the dining table, swallowing their cruelty and accepting their scraps, was gone forever. In her place stood a fiercely independent woman who owned her future, dictating her own terms with unshakable, quiet power. 6 months later, the grand ballroom of the Field Museum was transformed into a sea of glittering lights and elegant floral arrangements. I stood at the edge of the stage wearing a custom midnight blue evening gown that cascaded perfectly to the marble floor. A heavy crystal microphone rested in my hand as I looked out over a crowd of 500 tech executives, venture capitalists, and bright-eyed aspiring designers. Tonight was the official launch gala for the Horizon Tech Initiative. It was a $50 million endowment fund I had personally established, entirely dedicated to providing full-ride scholarships, living stipends, and career placement for women transitioning into user experience and user interface design. It was the exact career path my parents had relentlessly mocked. They had told me I was wasting my life making pretty pictures on a screen while they praised Trey's fraudulent financial empire. Tonight, I was using my so-called failure to rewrite the futures of hundreds of women who had also been told they were not enough. I delivered my keynote address with absolute, unwavering confidence. I did not mention my family by name. I did not need to give them that power. Instead, I spoke about the fundamental principles of design. I told the audience that sometimes a system is so deeply flawed and so inherently toxic that you cannot simply patch it with temporary updates. Sometimes you have to tear the entire framework down to the studs and build something entirely new from scratch. The room erupted into a standing ovation as I stepped off the stage. I spent the next 2 hours shaking hands, accepting congratulations, and meeting the very first cohort of women whose lives were about to change forever. When the gala finally wrapped up, my private security team escorted me to an armored town car waiting by the museum steps. The drive back to my residence was quiet and smooth. I watched the vibrant city lights of Chicago blur past the tinted windows. 6 months ago, I had driven these same streets in a freezing 10-year-old Honda Civic, nursing a profound sense of worthlessness after being thrown out of my parents' mansion. Tonight, I was returning to a sprawling $30 million penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, entirely unburdened and entirely free. The private elevator opened directly into my foyer. I stepped inside, dropping my evening clutch onto the entryway table and kicking off my designer heels. The penthouse was perfectly quiet, bathed in the soft ambient glow of the city skyline pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I walked into the massive open-concept kitchen and opened the climate-controlled wine fridge. I bypassed the standard bottles and selected a vintage Cabernet Sauvignon, pouring a generous measure into a crystal glass. I wrapped a thick cashmere shawl over my shoulders, slid the heavy glass balcony door open, and stepped out into the crisp night air. The winter chill had finally broken, giving way to a cool, refreshing spring breeze that rolled off the dark expanse of the lake. I walked to the edge of the glass railing, resting my hand against the cool metal, taking a long, slow sip of the rich wine. The city stretched out beneath me, a glowing grid of endless possibilities. Inside the penthouse, resting on the plush outdoor sofa, my phone screen suddenly illuminated the darkness. It vibrated violently against the fabric, a harsh buzzing sound breaking the tranquility of the night. I walked over and picked it up. The caller identification simply read, "Unknown number." I did not feel a sudden spike of anxiety. My heart rate did not elevate. The old familiar dread that used to suffocate me whenever my family reached out was completely gone. I knew exactly who was on the other end of that line. It was Patricia. She was likely standing at a payphone or using a cheap prepaid burner phone, shivering in the drafty hallway of her cramped, rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city. She had spent the last 6 months completely ostracized from her wealthy social circles, watching her husband work a minimum wage job while her golden child son-in-law sat in a federal penitentiary. She was desperate. She was finally realizing that the facade was permanently broken and that the daughter she had treated like garbage was her only remaining lifeline in a ruined world. She was calling to beg for a handout, to cry about how families should forgive each other, to spin one last pathetic web of manipulation. I stared at the glowing screen, watching the unknown number flash in the dark. 6 months ago, I might have answered. I might have engaged in a screaming match demanding the apology I had deserved my entire life. I might have wanted to hear the defeat in her voice, to gloat about my victory and rub my billions in her face. But as I stood there enveloped in the quiet luxury of a life I had secured through my own brilliant resilience, I realized I did not need an apology. I did not need closure from a woman incapable of genuine remorse. I did not need to punish them any further because their reality was already a prison they could never escape. I lifted my thumb and hovered it over the screen. I did not feel anger. I felt nothing but profound, absolute apathy. I tapped the red block button. The screen instantly went black, cutting off the vibration and returning the balcony to total peaceful silence. I tossed the phone carelessly back onto the plush cushions of the outdoor sofa. I turned my back on it completely. I walked back to the edge of the glass railing and took another slow sip of the vintage wine. The cold, crisp air filled my lungs, wiping away the last lingering traces of my past. I looked out at the glowing skyline of Chicago, breathing in the deep, intoxicating scent of absolute freedom. The game was finally over, and I had won. The true jackpot in this story wasn't the $876 million. It was the courage to finally walk away from toxic manipulation. Nora's journey teaches us that blood does not automatically grant someone the right to your peace, your success, or your future. When people consistently belittle your hard work and only value you for what they can extract, the most powerful response isn't a screaming match. It is establishing ironclad boundaries. Real wealth is found in building an authentic life on your own terms. Sometimes you have to completely demolish a broken system to build the sanctuary you deserve. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic expectations to protect your own peace? Share your story of setting boundaries in the comments below. If Nora's journey to absolute freedom resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience, sweet karma, and reclaiming your power. Remember, your worth is never determined by those who refuse to see it.